Thinking of questions you might have for our speakers this evening.
Well, I'd like to thank Dinesh for that very interesting and powerful statement. I wish my Rutgers students had been so smart. I don't think anybody needs to be second-guessing God when it comes to why there's suffering in the world. Asking why there is suffering is not second-guessing God. Presumably, everybody thinks that God gave human beings extraordinary intelligence. I'm simply asking that we use our intelligence to try to understand our world. It's not challenging God to ask why there is suffering in the world. Dinesh says, what position are we in to ask the question of suffering? Well, we're in the position of being intelligent people who have brains, and we should use them. The book of Job is probably the best known instance of somebody questioning why there is suffering. In the book of Job, Job wants to know why, since he is innocent, he's suffering, and he demands that God appear to him and tell him why he's suffering. God finally does appear to Job. But instead of answering Job's question to tell him why he's suffering, God says, "Who are you to ask me? I am almighty and you are a peon." God squashes Job under his mighty thumb, and Job writhes on the ground in dust and ashes and repents for even asking. Is that what we should do in the face of the big questions that we have to ask? Should we writhe on the ground and say, well, I'm not going to ask the question because it's too deep for me to understand? Should we admit that we can't know and so we're not going to ask? I don't think so. I don't think the example of Bill Gates deciding to withhold a computer from his son so that his son thinks Bill Gates is somebody different from whom he really thought he was is really an appropriate or an adequate explanation of what we're dealing with the problem of suffering. God is not Bill Gates, and he didn't withhold a computer from a son. There are people starving to death in this world. Yes, if God's in charge of this world, he must be different from what we thought. But where does that leave us? What is he really like? God does intervene in the world according to traditional Jewish and Christian thinking. And my guess is that Dinesh thinks that God intervenes in the world and that he answers prayer. If that's the case, why is it there's so much suffering? Now, Dinesh differentiates between moral evil and natural evil, and he points out that God did not cause the Holocaust. Fair enough. Of course God didn't cause the Holocaust, and nobody said that God caused the Holocaust. But does God answer prayer or not? When 6 million of his people are crying out to help, does he answer or not? If you think the answer is no, he does not answer prayer, what does that do to your faith? And what does it do to Dinesh's faith? Does God intervene in this world or not? Or maybe he didn't like those Jews. Maybe he would have saved the Christians. Really? Maybe God likes us better than the people who are starving to death because we had a very nice dinner, thank you very much. So maybe God's on our side, but he's not on the side of the people who are suffering. Is that what we want to think? Is that going to be our theology? I simply don't buy the idea that the laws of nature are the way they have to be or we could not have life. I think that this is not a solid argument in the least. Who made the laws of nature? You say, well, if you had some other laws, then it wouldn't work this way. We couldn't have Homo sapiens. Right. Within the framework of nature as we have it now, we have to have tectonic plates. You mean God could not create a world without tectonic plates? There have to be tsunamis that kill 300,000 people? Really? There have to be? You're telling me that God couldn't do something different? God couldn't dream up a world without tectonic plates? How limited is God? Is God so limited that he could not create a world without earthquakes and hurricanes and tsunamis and droughts? Is that really the case, that God couldn't do it? If that's what you think, then I would say you're probably leaning more toward my direction. I don't believe that, in fact, there could be a God who causes suffering or allows suffering if he could prevent it. And I don't believe if there was an all-powerful God in the world that, in fact, you could say that he can't prevent it. Thank you.